Hello? Okay, I think we can start now. Hello everyone. Wish you all a happy Culture Day and want to welcome you to our Global Teams webinar celebrating cultural diversity. I would like to introduce myself first. My name is Anna Karras and I'm Intercultural Program Coordinator with RW3. I grew up in Germany and have moved to the US 3 years ago. I'm sure you have noticed my accent. I've been part of the RW3 team for more than a year now. Our presenter today is Grayson Neverance. To tell you a little bit more about Grayson, she is Director and Intercultural Trainer with RW3. She delivers engaging, interactive training programs with expertise in working effectively across cultures, building high-performing multicultural teams, and supporting expatriate success. Prior to joining RW3, Grayson was part of a global marketing team at Johnson & Johnson. She received her MBA with UNC Kenan-Flagler Business School, and she has also lived abroad. She lived in Valletta, Germany, and also in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. So, before Grayson starts the session, I would like to go through some housekeeping items. The presentation will take the full 30 minutes, but we will stay on for a few more minutes afterwards in case there are any questions. You can then type in your questions to the little question box that you can see in the side panel. Of course, you can also send us questions via email after the webinar, and we will get back to you. Also, during the course of the webinar, there will be some questions to the audience. We want to engage you to participate, and you can then type in your thoughts and answers into the question box. Should you for some reason get disconnected during the webinar and need to re-enter the room, you should have received an email about an hour ago, and you can just follow the directions in the email to re-enter the room. We have two audio options today. So all of you have dialed in either via phone or using the headset with the computer. You can find the audio settings in the side panel. There you can choose which option you're using, and you can also, if you click on phone, you can see the dial-in number in case you need it. So I think that was it from my side. I will now hand over to Grayson. Enjoy the presentation.
Thanks, Anna. I'm delighted to be here today to talk about leveraging your global team's diversity. In our 30 minutes together, I will introduce RW3 Culture Wizard and talk about UN World Culture Day. We will define high-performing teams, learn to communicate effectively across cultures, and share best practices for multicultural teams. A little bit about us. RW3 Culture Wizard was founded in 2001 by Michael Schell and Charlene Solomon. Mike and Charlene have really been thought leaders in the world of intercultural training for over 30 years now, and we are now serving clients from over 100 companies around the world across many different industries as well as geographic locations. We have also had the privilege to be authors of books and articles on cultural and global business management. In 2002, the UN declared May 21st the World Day for Cultural Diversity. This day is a wonderful opportunity to deepen our understanding of cultural diversity and learn to live and work together better. RW3 really loves participating in the Do One Thing campaign that encourages people and organizations around the world to take concrete action to support diversity. Let's start to think about what it means to be a high-performing team. Dr. Carol Kovach of UCLA produced fascinating research demonstrating that culturally diverse teams are either the most effective teams or the most ineffective teams in terms of creativity and productivity. On the ineffective side, we see diversity leading to misunderstandings and conflicts that can stifle creativity and halt productivity. On the highly effective side, we see diversity fostering creativity and productivity through clear communication and understanding of unique experiences and ideas. For example, A new product development team consisting of members from a variety of cultures, age ranges, and functional backgrounds is well positioned to deliver innovative new products, assuming they communicate well and work toward high performance. So what is high performance? If everyone could now go to the question box in your right panel and take a minute to type a few words that come to mind when you think about a high-performing team, I would love to know your definition of a high-performing team. We have some answers coming in. I see open communication, lots about communication, teams that achieve results, a lot about results and goals, self-directed, diverse ideas, competent, efficient, collaborative. Team members enjoy each other, excellent. Get stuff done, nice. Aligned outcomes, delivering goals, positive. So lots of good thoughts here about the definitions of a high-performing team. When I first began researching high-performing teams, one of the things that I found most interesting is that a lot of things that I thought defined high-performing teams and a lot of things that other people thought were characteristics of high-performing teams were actually defining effective performance. Things like open communication, effective problem solving, and measurement. Now, the interesting thing is that high-performing teams have all of these characteristics that you see on the left side of the screen, but then they add a few that you see here on the right. For example, higher levels of camaraderie. So people on high-performing teams truly like being around one another. They have increased levels of interdependence, so people can easily shift roles and pick up responsibilities to cover for one another when it's needed. Greater collective learning and adaptive capabilities. So you actually learn better as a result of being part of your high-performing team. And closer identification with team outcomes and belief in the impossible. I once used this slide in a presentation with a manufacturing client. And I was actually presenting right after the president, who was talking about the sales goals for the year. He said that the corporate had set a goal of $4 billion in sales for the year. And then he looked at the team and he said, but I don't see why we can't do 6. So he was asking for a full 50% higher than corporate expectations. He was really pushing this team for high performance based on the belief that they could do the impossible. We can boil keys to high performance down to 3 main areas: purpose, trust, and communication. At the intersection lies high performance. Today, we are going to focus on communication. With that in mind, let's talk about communicating across cultures. Many people like to think about culture like an iceberg. On the surface, culture is what you see. It's what people eat, it's what they wear, it's how they interact with one another when they're meeting for the first time. But much like an iceberg, what's truly important is what lives beneath the surface. It's those non-observable values, beliefs, and assumptions that have built up in a society over time and make a culture what it is. I work with a woman from the UK that does a lot of business in South Korea. She shared a story with me where she had an opportunity to travel to meet her colleagues in South Korea. And at the end of her first day, they held a large banquet in her honor. So throughout the banquet, she was eating and drinking. She noticed that the person on her left kept filling her drink. And she didn't think much about it because she was just having fun and enjoying being there. But about midway through the meal, she looked to her right and noticed that that person's glass was empty. And then she understood that it was her responsibility to fill that person's glass, just like the person on her other side was filling hers. So she took the pitcher, she filled the glass. Of course, the person seemed very appreciative because they were eating kind of spicy South Korean food. So what you saw on the surface was that protocol of people filling one another's drinks. But what was underneath that protocol, underneath the surface, was the South Korean deeply held value for group orientation, so welcoming people into the group and making them feel taken care of. At its core, culture is taught to us from earliest childhood. It's taught in our school classes, in our religious classes, even in our children's stories. I often share with global audiences when I'm teaching them about American culture the story of the little engine that could. The little engine that could is a story that every American kid grows up hearing. So the little engine has a goal to make it to the top of a hill. And as your parents are reading the story to you, you can start to hear the engine come to life as she says, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can. And of course, the little engine makes it to the top of the hill. There's a large celebration. And what every American child takes away from this is the idea that if you work hard enough, anything is possible. And this is a value that is absolutely fundamental to American culture. As we start to look deeper into culture and think about the way that we teach it, we teach culture using cultural norms. Cultural norms are generalizations. People oftentimes ask me about the difference between cultural norms and stereotypes. The important thing to understand is that the key to cultural norms is objective understanding, not judging, like often accompanies a stereotype. So the goal of our cultural model is to provide you as a learner with a lens so that when you walk into a room, you can pick up on cultural cues and determine the best ways to adapt your behavior for greater success. And within that, of course, it is always important to remember that people are unique. And under stress, most people will revert to their cultural norms. If you're feeling frustrated at work, it could be differences in cultural style. So take a step back and think to yourself, is this cultural? And if it is, what can I do to adapt my behavior for greater success? What we're looking at here is an example of a diverse multicultural team from the Culture Wizard Global Teams tool. We cover 151 countries on Culture Wizard, and this tool allows you to compare the cultural norms of your home country and up to 5 different countries. I pulled this image using my profile, so you see my home country of the United States in the blue. You see Australia in the red, Brazil in the green, China in the orange, France in the yellow, and India in the purple. If you would like to see other countries on Culture Wizard, I highly recommend that you check out the Global Teams tool on your Culture Wizard site. So this tool highlights 6 of the 8 dimensions on the ICAM model that most impact team interactions. As you'll see, the dimensions include hierarchy, group, relationships, communication, time, and control. The first thing that you'll notice is this visual representation of potential cultural gaps. And from there, you can click on details to learn more about the dimension, as well as your personal cultural profile. Since we're keeping it to 30 minutes today, we're going to focus in on 3 of these dimensions. We're going to talk about hierarchy, relationships, and communication. First, let's talk about hierarchy. Hierarchy is an individual's beliefs about power and authority and how they view empowerment. The scale ranges from egalitarian to hierarchical. On the egalitarian side of the spectrum, egalitarian cultures tend to value self-initiative. On the hierarchical side of the spectrum, cultures value rank and role. A good cue for this dimension is how people address one another. When you're meeting someone for the first time, if they're using given names and no titles, most likely they're on the egalitarian side of the spectrum. If people are using titles and family names, most likely they're on the hierarchical side of the spectrum. Hierarchy and formality often go hand in hand, whereby hierarchical cultures tend to be more formal and egalitarian cultures tend to be more informal. Let's bring in our example team. You'll see Australia and the United States as being highly egalitarian, France right in the middle, Brazil and China leaning more towards hierarchical, and then India being very hierarchical. From a team perspective, hierarchy impacts expectations of leadership and how much deference people show to authority figures. Deference can be total, where the leader makes all of the decisions, even if they don't have the most knowledge on the subject, or minimal, where leaders are viewed as coaches or peers. It includes the amount of responsibility and control employees are given. For example, whether or not people feel that they're entitled to self-expression, like speaking up in meetings, and whether they feel empowered to take initiative, or they feel like they have to wait for specific instructions before they move forward. A client recently shared a story of hierarchy in their follow-the-sun workflow model. She told me that around 5 p.m. in the West Coast U.S., the team would pass their work, their completed work for the day, off to the team in Bangalore. It was 5:30 a.m. in Bangalore, and the work would be waiting for the team when they arrived later that morning. And then at the end of the day, the Bangalore team would do the same thing, passing their work back to the West Coast of the United States, thus following the sun. The problem was the Bangalore team, being more hierarchical, needed specific instructions and guidance to feel comfortable moving forward, and the American team preferred to pick their daily deliverables. We worked with these clients to help them recognize the problem and get creative with the solution. And what they ended up doing was, now at the end of the day, the Americans pass their work to the Indian team lead, who compiles all of the next steps and delegates the day's tasks. Then at the end of the day, he combines everything, passes it back, copying all of the Americans, and they claim their different tasks each day. My client said it's working brilliantly. Now we'll look at relationships. Relationships looks at an individual's beliefs about trust and friendship in business. The scale runs from transactional to interpersonal. On the transactional side of the spectrum, people tend to emphasize tasks and goals, whereas on the interpersonal side of the spectrum, relationships truly are the key to success. The relationships dimension describes the importance a society places on building extensive connections. It defines what constitutes a relationship and what expectations come with that. Developing trust is a big part of this dimension. In some cultures, trust is assumed, oftentimes thanks to a strong legal system. And in other cultures, typically more interpersonal cultures, trust has to be earned. The cue for this dimension is a fascinating one. The best cue for developing where someone falls on the spectrum is small talk, specifically when the small talk happens and how deep it goes. If you're coming into a meeting or a new business relationship and the person wants to start with small talk, so they want to spend the first part of your session together asking questions about you, about your background, about your schooling, maybe even about your family, then you know that that person leans towards the more interpersonal side of the spectrum. They need to get to know you and trust you before they can feel comfortable doing business with you. Now, on the opposite side of the spectrum, if you walk into a business meeting and people want to get straight to work, they want to go straight into the agenda, get everything done, then you know that that person is most likely on the transactional side of the spectrum. And where it gets really interesting is at the end of the meeting, if a transactional person has time and has decided that they like you, at that point, they will start asking you small talk questions. So they'll start asking you things, again, about your background, about your school, things of that nature. So a very interesting cue for the relationships dimension. With our example team, you can see that Americans rate a 1, so being highly transactional. Australia is at a 2, so leaning towards transactional as well. Then we have got Brazil, France, and India leaning more towards interpersonal, and China at being highly interpersonal. From a team perspective, the relationships dimension looks at the importance of knowing each other personally, whether trust is built or assumed, and the pace of productivity. A client once told me that in their organization, transactional Americans tend to start work very strong and slow down when problems arise. Their more interpersonal European colleagues tend to start very slowly as people build trust and evaluate plans, and then quickly build momentum once that trust is established. I saw this in action with another Culture Wizard client's launch. We had a cross-functional global team working on the launch, and at the first meeting, we spent 45 minutes of the hour getting to know each other and building trust. This is my actual contribution to that project kickoff. We shared our names, location, background, and a fun fact. It was perfect. We got to know each other, we built trust, and then we had the fun facts for small talk at the beginning of our virtual meetings. So for example, there is one woman on the team who lives in Belgium, and she loves coffee. I love coffee too. So if we were the first people on the call, we could talk about what roasts we were currently drinking or about fun upcoming trips like my Croatia vacation, which happens to be coming up next week. The last dimension we're going to look at today is communication. Communication is an individual's beliefs about directness and need for background. The scale runs from direct to indirect. On the direct side of the spectrum, people tend to mean what they say. There is very little nuance in the language. On the indirect side of the spectrum, messages tend to be more subtle. There are more nonverbals that are used and often a more tactful delivery as well. You can recognize the communication dimension most easily by people's comfort with contributing. So when you're sitting in a meeting or on a virtual call, the people that are first to speak up are most likely your direct communicators, whereas the people that hang back and wait to be asked for their contributions most likely are more indirect. Likewise, you can tell with a person's style, so whether they are very straightforward or if they tend to use more nuance and tact, and even in the mode in which people prefer to communicate. A lot of times people who are indirect prefer more face-to-face communication, whereas people who are direct could use technology very easily. I absolutely love the images on the screen for communication. A client actually drew these in my very first training with RW3. I was facilitating for a group of global HR managers, and a manager from China used these images to illustrate the differences in the ways that American engineers communicate versus how Chinese engineers communicate. So if you think about the gold star as the point of the communication, she said Americans try to start here. They try to start with, this is the point, this is the goal. And the Chinese engineers tend to start at the very beginning and work their way around and around and around and around until they get to the point. So when the Chinese engineers were communicating, the Americans were getting completely lost in all the background and all the details. And when the Americans were communicating, the Chinese were completely confused because they were like, well, what's the background? What's the context? Why are we doing this? When we take a look at our example team, you'll see that Australians are the most direct communicators on our team. Then we've got the Americans in at a 2, so still very direct. Brazil and France right in the middle. China leaning more towards indirect, and then India as being highly indirect. Communication is the use of language, both verbal and nonverbal. From a team perspective, communication includes the amount of information needed. Some people like to receive a lot of background information or context, as we were just talking about in the Chinese engineer example. And other people just want the key facts. This dimension highlights how people want to receive information, an idea that gets more and more complex as technology evolves. Some people prefer face-to-face whenever possible, and others would have every interaction over text message if they could. And along with that comes style and formality of messages. Communication also includes people's comfort with contributing, especially in virtual meetings. Teams also need to consider the nuances of language for non-native speakers and how nonverbal cues, including silence, impact messages. With the rest of our time today, we are going to discuss our top 5 tips for multicultural teams. As we discussed in the keys to high performance, trust is critical to the success of any team, whether that's a multicultural team in your country, whether it's a global team or a virtual team. Trust can be difficult to establish. It's challenging to maintain and can be easily damaged by cultural misunderstandings. To build trust, we recommend that you take the time to learn about each other, share your skills, your background, and even a bit of personal information. You can use the slide from the relationships section of this presentation to get you started. To build trust, it's important that you communicate clear expectations and deliver on your commitments. You can solidify these expectations by creating guidelines for respectful interaction. As we've learned today, diversity can drive high performance through creativity and productivity. But high-performing teams do not make assumptions. They deeply consider individuals within their own cultural context and create a hybrid culture where a written, codified set of standards acts as a roadmap for their team. On the right, you'll see the RW3 model for creating guidelines for respectful interaction. The way that this exercise works is you start off by creating a vision for success for your team. Then you look at potential cultural challenges to achieving that vision. Then you actually build a bridge to overcome the challenges and realize the success by creating these guidelines for respectful interaction. So people actually walk away with a document that says, this is how we're going to interact with each other in the most culturally appropriate ways. Examples of these guidelines can be as simple as, we'll join meetings 5 minutes early when possible to have some informal conversation, perhaps about coffee or Croatia. We'll share the burden of time zones and alternate as to when meetings take place. Encouraging contributions is critical to capitalizing on the diversity of your multicultural team. People need to feel comfortable expressing their unique ideas. To help, we recommend that people provide detailed agendas at least 24 hours in advance. Include discussion points and decision points. This gives indirect communicators and non-native speakers time to prepare their contributions. Ask open-ended questions when you're engaging with people to understand both if and how something is going to happen. This is especially helpful if you're working in cultures that do not like to say no. Make sure that you create opportunities for people to contribute both before and after meetings. That way, indirect communicators can deliver points to the leader for inclusion in the session. Or if they don't get a chance to contribute live, they can follow up after the meeting in writing or possibly even one-on-one. Number 4 is practice communicating. When you walk into a room or pick up the phone, remember the cultural lens. Actively listen for the cultural cues that we've talked about today and be prepared to adapt your approach. Give consideration for non-native speakers by giving them time to prepare and contribute. Allow time for silence. And at the end of the meeting or conversation, verify understanding, both verbally and in writing if possible. Last, it's important to evaluate your performance. Look at your individual contributions and the success of the team overall. Make it a 360 assessment if possible by getting feedback from senior leaders, colleagues, and direct reports. And after your evaluation, take the time to celebrate success and then, of course, plan to improve. If everyone could go to the question box now, I would love to know, what tips do you have to add for the rest of the people on the call? Okay, we've got some responses coming in. Active listening, excellent. Always include food, nice one. Take the time to listen, avoid making assumptions, keep a sense of humor and be open-minded. If not sure, ask, a very good one. Verbal cues and body language, considering time zones, excellent. Thank you for all of these contributions. One last question for you today before we give you the opportunity to ask more questions of us. Based on what you've learned, what is the first thing that you are going to do differently on your multicultural teams? We've got some answers coming in. So learning about your own culture, preparing agendas ahead of time, lots of people talking about agendas and giving people time to prepare, actively listen to the emails that you receive, excellent, giving enough notice, creating strategies for behaviors, spending more time in small talk? Excellent. These are all great action steps for everyone. So as we start to think about the next steps from our call today, we are going to send out a one-pager on best practices for multicultural teams. We're also going to send out a recording of today's event. You have the opportunity to join our Culture Day game for a chance to win a Kindle Fire. We've been getting great feedback about this game. People are having a lot of fun and learning a lot. You will also have the opportunity to experience the Working With courses. These are 1-hour country-specific courses that will be live on your Culture Wizard site for the rest of the week. And if you have questions, we are here to help. So with that in mind, I would like to thank everyone for joining us today. It was a real pleasure to be with you. And I'll turn it back over to Anna for questions and to wrap up.
Yes, thank you so much, Grayson. That was wonderful. And also, again, thank you all for joining. So we will be on for a few more minutes in case you have any questions, but also you can send us questions via email to info@rw3.com. I did see some questions in between. One of them was if the recording will be sent out. So yes, I think Grayson answered this already. The recording will be sent out to everyone at the end of this week. Also, I did see there were requests for other countries. So we are sorry if the countries of your interest were missing in the presentation. Unfortunately, we couldn't cover all of them. But if you do want to see the results for other countries, please visit the Culture Wizard and check the culture calculator or the country profiles to see how the country of your interest is placed within the 8 dimensions.
Anna, I see a question now. Someone is asking if there will be more sessions like this one offered in the future and exploring some other components. That's a great question. And yes, we about every 4 to 6 weeks host cultural wisdom webinars where we cover different topics. And it's a great idea to continue this session and cover the other 3 dimensions. So thank you for that. We'll see if we can get it on the agenda. Anna, I think those are all of our questions for today. So if people have other questions, our email address is at the bottom. We are always happy to help. And again, thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you.